Please pray with me. Gracious God, may the meditations of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be a pleasing offering to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Jesus and his disciples are walking amid the buildings of Jerusalem. They see the great walls and the magnificent temple, all of the human effort, the blood, the sweat, the tears, over multiple generations made real through these amazing structures. Yet it's almost like Jesus doesn't see them at all. He just tells them that all of this will be destroyed. Now, Bethany as a church, we have seen our building destroyed twice by fire. St. John itself has relocated at least once in demolishing their old building. Nevertheless, I don't think we'd appreciate someone pointing that out to us on a Sunday. I could see us saying, look at our beautiful sanctuary, look at our stained glass windows, we might say. And that person might say, yeah, but someday all of this will be nothing. We wouldn't appreciate that very much, because our tithes, our offerings, and in Bethany's case, insurance payments, made our building a reality. This is the product of generations of church folk faithfully giving. Hundreds of good, generous people made this possible. How can someone say something so awful? Someday all of this will be nothing? Now, our first reading is from the book of Daniel. Along with the book of Revelation, these are the only two apocalyptic books in the Bible. Apocalyptic is one of those big words we biblical people like to throw around. Apocalyptic literature comes from a time of crisis for a people, where terrible things are happening. Apocalyptic literature often takes the form of a vision with very elaborate symbolism, including strange animals with numbers of heads and horns and all sorts of odd things, and mystical numbers. Daniel was written during a time when the Jewish people were being persecuted by the Hellenistic king Antiochus IV, who wanted to make the Jews worship the Greek gods. He even took over the temple, set up a statue of Zeus, and sacrificed a pig on the altar. You can imagine how offensive that would have been to Jews. And he persecuted all of those who objected. Here in today's reading, we see a reference to Michael. Now, Michael here is the archangel, and he is the angel who serves as the protector of the Jewish people. Here, people are urged to not give up hope, because God's deliverance is coming. Notice here that God is the one bringing deliverance, not some great human leader. God is the source of deliverance. God is the source of vindication. Our second reading in Hebrews 10 is our last reading from the epistle to the Hebrews. I'll give you all a second to grieve that passing. I know you're going to be sad now that we've finished with the book of Hebrews. That's what I thought. I'm a little bit ambivalent myself. Here in this text, it continues the discussion on the priesthood of Jesus Christ, which wouldn't have been interrupted if somebody had followed the lectionary last week, Judy. But I digress. What was needed was a sacrifice to end all sacrifices, something the old sacrificial system couldn't offer. Christ's sacrifice brings about forgiveness of sins and brings about a purification from sins, because we rely on God. We rely on God's efforts. Our faith is in Jesus Christ. Our reading from the Gospel of Mark takes a detour into the apocalyptic, kind of matching with the book of Daniel. In fact, this section from Mark chapter 13 is called Mark's Little Apocalypse. This discussion is precipitated by the disciples getting all excited by the impressive buildings in Jerusalem. Jesus points out that none of these buildings will stand forever. One day, and in fact one day soon, they will be completely destroyed. Now we, the audience, know that this will happen in 70 CE, when the Romans in retaliation for the Jewish revolt, destroy the temple and burn Jerusalem to the ground. But of course, the disciples didn't know that during Jesus' lifetime. So they ask him, when will this happen? And what will happen? Jesus warns them to not be misled. There will be many false Christs. Jesus says these wars and rumors of war signal the beginning of birth pangs, not the end. So this is kind of a key difference here. Those signs of upheaval don't indicate the end. Rather, they indicate the beginning of the birth pangs. Sorry, pregnant women, this labor might last a while. All of these big, beautiful things we rely on, like cities and temples, will fall because God alone remains constant. Now, I know this can sound like a bit of a downer. All that we faithful have built one day will no longer exist. And sometimes that is a downer. But I think the truth is very different. Because our scriptures and our tradition remind us that our faith isn't in our own efforts. Our faith isn't in the achievements of the ancestors or our achievements. Our faith isn't in beautiful buildings and well-managed investments. Our faith is in God. And our faith is in God's work through Jesus Christ. Of course, God works with and through us to bring about God's aims, but God's vision is far greater than anything we might perceive. When we look at human history, we might see 3 steps forward and then 4 steps backwards. And that's discouraging. We might think that we've reached a point for where we've turned a corner on all of the social evils our country has been bathed in from the very beginning. Oppression of minorities, oppression of the poor, fear and even hatred of those who are different than us. But then some event comes along that convinces us that no, we have not overcome our old familial social sins. And we are tempted to fall into despair. Maybe even tempted to flee the country. I hear the line to get into Haiti is short these days. But seriously, these times can be scary. There's been so much political rhetoric against transgender folk. And as a gay man, I know that I'd be next on the list after the transgender folk. But our faith was never in human efforts. Our faith was never in human politics. Our faith was never in human institutions. Ultimately, like the temple in Jerusalem, all those things will be swept away. Our faith is in God. And that frees us from fear. That frees us from despair. That gives us hope, no matter what happens in this world. We, the church, keep doing what we always do. We educate, we reflect, we organize. We give support to society's victims, and we work to make an unjust system just a little less unjust. Nothing has changed. We worship together. We fellowship together. And we witness. We witness to what God is doing in our lives and in the lives of those we know. We humans can be so enamored with our efforts. Look at these great buildings. But Jesus reminds us that those things won't remain. Nothing we humans do will remain. But that's not a source of despair. Rather, it's a wake-up call to the real object of our faith, God. Recognizing that God is the one we trust in. God is the one who frees us from fear and despair. God is the one who empowers us to do the work of the church. And little by little, to make this a better world.